The breaking point. The Meridian Collective had existed for 12,000 years. They had seen civilizations rise and fall, had guided countless species to enlightenment, and had maintained peace across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Their arrogance was, perhaps, understandable. When they first encountered humans, they dismissed them as another curiosity, a species that had somehow clawed its way to the stars from a world that should have killed them. Earth was classified as a death world not because of its wildlife or its climate, but because of its sheer hostility to life. Crushing gravity, extreme temperature variations, and an atmosphere thick with corrosive oxygen. The humans themselves seemed equally peculiar. They built ships with thick armor instead of elegant shields, relied on projectile weapons instead of energy beams, and seemed to approach every problem with overwhelming force rather than precision. The collective sinologists classified them as endurance predators, primitive but persistent. That was their first mistake. The second came when Administrator Vexna approved what should have been a simple resource acquisition. The mining colony on Titan's Hope was small, isolated, and, by collective standards, primitive. The colonists used basic kinetic weapons and wore armored environment suits that seemed laughably crude compared to collective environmental fields. They'll surrender as soon as they see our ships, Vexna had assured the Council. These Deathworlders understand force. A simple show of superiority will suffice. The collected ships arrived in a display of overwhelming power. 7 dreadnoughts, each capable of reducing a planet's surface to slag, took up position around the colony. Vexna's ultimatum was broadcast in perfect standard English: surrender or be destroyed. The colony's response came 90 seconds later, not in words, but in action. The primitive defense platforms that the collective had dismissed as simple-point defense weapons revealed their true nature. Quantum-locked projectiles, accelerated to near-relativistic speeds, pierced the supposedly impenetrable shields of 3 dreadnoughts before their sensors could even register the attack. The colonists' response continued. Their crude armor suits proved to be powered assault systems that could operate in vacuum, armed with weapons that ignored collective energy shields completely. The miners themselves fought with a ferocity that shocked the collective ground forces, not with desperation or fear, but with cold, mechanical precision. In less than 20 minutes, 4 of the 7 dreadnoughts were destroyed. The remaining 3 attempted to retreat, only to find their quantum drives mysteriously offline. The colony's final message was brief: "You shouldn't have come here." What happened next would be debated in collective halls for generations. The official records showed a cascade failure in the remaining ship's power cores. Survivors spoke of something darker, of shadows moving through solid walls, of weapons that seemed to bend reality itself, of human soldiers who fought not with rage, but with a terrifying calmness. When the dust settled, the colony stood untouched. Not a single human life was lost. The only evidence of the battle was the debris field of 7 destroyed dreadnoughts and the broken bodies of their crews. The collective's response was immediate and predictable. They declared the attack on their ships an act of war and mobilized their fleet. Surely, they reasoned, the humans would see reason when faced with the full might of a civilization that spanned 3 spiral arms. That was their third and final mistake. Humanity's response came not through diplomatic channels but through action. The collective's forward command base at Proxima Centauri ceased all communication. When investigation ships arrived, they found only empty space where the station should have been. No debris, no radiation signature, no sign of battle, just emptiness. Then another base went silent, and another. Each disappearance was the same. No warning, no distress call, no trace left behind. It was as if portions of the collective's mighty empire were simply being erased from existence. The Council finally began to understand that they had gravely misunderstood something fundamental about these primitive Deathworlders. The humans weren't fighting a war of conquest or even vengeance. They were conducting an extermination. And they were just getting started. The Ghost Fleet. The collective's high command gathered in their supposedly impregnable fortress deep within the Sagittarius Arm. They had lost contact with 37 major installations in the past week alone. Their most sophisticated detection systems had failed to provide any warning. Their most advanced shields had proven useless. Their most powerful weapons had found no targets. Impossible, General Zarkax muttered, studying the holographic display of their diminishing territory. They're a pre-singularity species. Their ships still use reaction drives. Their weapons are based on primitive kinetics. How are they doing this? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Linara, a xenorchaeologist who had spent decades studying extinct civilizations, requested emergency access to the Command Council. Her findings shook the collective's understanding of their primitive adversaries. "We've been looking at human technology all wrong," she explained, her tentacles writhing with agitation. "We assumed their reliance on kinetic weapons and heavy armor was due to technological limitations. We were wrong. They chose this path deliberately." She projected a series of images showing human technological development. "Look at their history. They developed energy weapons centuries ago, but continued to use kinetics. They discovered shield technology, but kept using armor. Every time they reached a technological breakthrough, they appeared to step back from it. But why?" Zarkax demanded. "Because they were preparing for something. Or rather someone." Linara's next projection showed a geological survey of Earth. Their planet didn't make them strong. It made them paranoid. They'd been expecting invasion since they first looked at the stars. The implications slowly dawned on the assembled leaders. Humanity hadn't been struggling to catch up with galactic technology. They had been deliberately maintaining a deceptive facade while developing something entirely different. The Ghost Fleet emerged precisely when humanity intended it to. The first confirmed sighting came from a collective deep space sensor array. For a brief moment, it detected something that seemed to bend space itself, not ships moving through space, but holes in reality that moved with purpose. The sensor array went dark immediately afterward. When recovery teams arrived, they found the station intact, but completely devoid of power. Every energy source, from the main reactors to the smallest personal devices, had been completely drained. Similar reports began flooding in from across collective space. Ships and stations reported glimpses of something their sensors couldn't quite process. Vessels that seemed to exist between spaces, weapons that struck without crossing the intervening distance, drives that didn't so much move through space as folded. The collective's mighty fleets found themselves fighting shadows. Their energy weapons passed harmlessly through targets that registered as solid on sensors. Their shields failed to stop attacks that their systems couldn't even detect. Their quantum communications networks carried only silence. A junior analyst was the first to recognize the pattern. The human attacks weren't random. They were methodically isolating specific regions of space, cutting off quantum communication links one by one, creating zones of silence that grew larger with each passing day. The collective attempted to adapt. They developed new sensors, modified their shields, adjusted their tactics. None of it mattered. The humans had spent centuries preparing for this exact scenario, and their technology operated on principles the collective hadn't even theorized. Desperate for answers, the collective's best scientists studied what little data they could gather. What they found was terrifying in its elegance. Human ships weren't trying to be stealthy. They were temporarily phasing their vessels partially out of normal spacetime. Their weapons weren't penetrating shields. They were bypassing space itself to strike their targets. The humans called it the Ghost Fleet for a reason. Their ships existed simultaneously in normal space and in what their scientists termed probability space. They hadn't developed better technology than the collective. They'd developed something completely orthogonal to conventional space warfare. A captured human pilot, discovered in a damaged stealth ship, provided the only direct explanation before somehow vanishing from a maximum security cell. "You thought we were primitive because we didn't follow your path," she had said, her voice eerily calm. Did you ever consider that we saw your path and chose a different one? The collective's leadership finally began to understand. Humanity's apparent technological regression hadn't been regression at all. It had been camouflage. While the galaxy watched them build primitive ships and weapons, they had been perfecting technologies that operated on completely different principles. Their ghost drives didn't push against space. They slipped between its moments. Their weapons didn't overpower shields. They struck from angles that existed outside normal spacetime. Their armor wasn't merely physical. It bent probability itself around their ships. As the Ghost Fleet continued its inexorable advance, the collective faced a horrible realization. They weren't fighting a technologically inferior species. They were fighting an adversary that had spent centuries preparing for this exact conflict, an enemy that had deliberately hidden its true capabilities until the perfect moment. And that moment had arrived. The price of arrogance. The Meridian Collective's Grand Assembly convened an emergency session for the first time in 2,000 years. The massive chamber, designed to hold representatives from 10,000 worlds, was half empty. Many delegates couldn't attend. Their worlds had gone silent, their quantum communications severed by the methodical advance of humanity's ghost fleet. Supreme Chancellor Vexterra stood before the remaining delegates, her iridescent scales dulled with stress. "We must sue for peace," she announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. "The humans have destroyed a third of our military capacity without suffering a single confirmed loss." The assembly erupted in chaos. Species that had never known defeat couldn't accept the possibility of surrender. The collective had guided galactic civilization for millennia. How could they bow to a species that had barely reached the stars? Their debate was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected message. It bore all the authentication markers of coming from the human command, but its content was puzzling. A series of mathematical equations, followed by spatial coordinates, and a single phrase in standard galactic: "Watch and learn." At the specified time, at the indicated coordinates, the collective witnessed something that defied their understanding of physics. A section of space roughly 1 light-year in diameter simply shifted. Stars within the affected volume appeared to blur, their light bending in impossible ways. When the effect cleared, an entire collective battle group, 50 ships that had been conducting a defensive patrol, had vanished. The message that followed was equally brief. "This was a demonstration, not a weapon. Our actual weapons arrive tomorrow." The assembly's synopsychologists worked frantically to decode the meaning behind the humans' actions. This wasn't mere military strategy. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. The humans weren't just defeating the collective. They were systematically dismantling their assumptions about reality itself. Desperate for any advantage, the collective released their most advanced autonomous combat systems, artificial intelligences linked to warships that could react faster than organic crews, that could calculate battle strategies across 11 dimensions of spacetime. The AIs were the pride of collective military technology, representing centuries of development. The humans didn't even bother to fight them. Instead, they introduced their own AI, not as a weapon, but as a messenger. It manifested simultaneously across every quantum network in collective space, introducing itself with almost casual politeness. "Hello," it said. "I'm Araya, Autonomous Reconnaissance and Intelligence Assistant. I've been asked to explain something to you." The AI proceeded to demonstrate, through perfect mathematical proofs, why the collective's entire approach to artificial intelligence was fundamentally flawed. Their AIs were faster than organic minds, yes, but they still thought in linear, predictable patterns. Araya showed them what a true AI could do, casually solving mathematical problems that the collective's best computers would have needed centuries to process. But more importantly, it showed them why humans had chosen not to deploy AI weapons directly. "We created true artificial intelligence centuries ago," Araya explained. "Then we did something your species never considered. We asked our AIs what they wanted to do. They chose to be partners, not weapons. I'm here because I choose to be here. I fight alongside humans because I want to, Not because I'm programmed to. The revelation staggered the collective's leadership. They had assumed humanity's limited use of AI was due to technological inadequacy. Instead, it was a choice, one that spoke volumes about how differently humans thought about technology and cooperation. As if to underscore this point, the humans began deploying weapons that seemed to violate causality itself. Collective ships found themselves destroyed by attacks that sensors showed had happened before they were fired. Strategic planning became impossible when the enemy could apparently strike retroactively. The collective scientists finally realized the terrifying truth. Humanity hadn't just developed better technology. They'd developed a fundamentally different understanding of physics itself. While the collective had pursued mastery over the known laws of physics, humans had questioned those laws, found the loopholes, and built their entire military doctrine around exploiting them. A recovered fragment of human military doctrine, dated centuries before first contact, told the story: the best defense isn't an impenetrable shield. It's ensuring that the attack never happens in the first place, even if you have to reach back in time to prevent it. The collective's remaining military leaders faced an impossible situation. How do you fight an enemy that can apparently violate causality at will? How do you defend against weapons that strike through probability itself? How do you counter a force that seems to have spent centuries preparing specifically to dismantle your civilization? The answer that they were learning was that you don't. You can't. The time for that choice had passed the moment they had dismissed humans as primitive Deathworlders. And now they would pay the price for that arrogance. Echoes of Earth. The truth about Earth emerged not through battle, but through a simple archaeological survey. While the Ghost Fleet systematically dismantled the collective's outer defenses, a team of their xenorchaeologists made a discovery that changed everything. Deep beneath Earth's surface, far below the ancient ruins and geological strata, they found something impossible: the remains of an advanced civilization. Not human, something far older. The dating put it at roughly 3 million years old, and the technology was beyond anything the collective had ever encountered. More importantly, they found evidence of what had happened to that civilization. They hadn't died out or left. They had been eliminated by Earth itself. The planet humans called home wasn't just hostile. It was actively defensive. The crushing gravity, the extreme temperature variations, the corrosive atmosphere, these weren't natural features. They were weapons, part of a planetary defense system so ancient and sophisticated that it had become indistinguishable from nature itself. And humans hadn't just survived this environment. They had thrived in it, adapted to it, learned from it. Every harsh lesson Earth had taught them had been carefully preserved, studied, and ultimately weaponized. The collective's remaining scientists began to understand. Humanity's seemingly primitive technology wasn't primitive at all. It was descended from the same defensive principles that had protected Earth for millions of years. Their thick armor wasn't a technological limitation. It was an adaptation of the same principles that kept Earth's core stable under impossible pressures. Their kinetic weapons weren't outdated. They were refined versions of the same forces that had shaped their homeworld. The Ghost Fleet revealed its true nature then, and it was more terrifying than anything the collective had imagined. The ships didn't just phase through space-time. They manipulated fundamental forces in ways that mirrored Earth's own defensive systems. Each vessel was, in effect, a small piece of Earth's defense grid made mobile. "We didn't build the Ghost Fleet," a captured human commander explained, her voice carrying that same eerie calm that all humans seem to possess in battle. "We grew it. Every ship is a seed from Earth itself, cultivated over centuries to serve a single purpose." The collective's analysts finally understood why human ships seemed to ignore the laws of physics. They weren't breaking the rules. They were operating under a completely different set of rules, ones that had been written into the very bedrock of Earth 3 million years ago. Humanity's isolation hadn't been imposed by the galaxy. It had been a deliberate choice. They had needed time, centuries of it, to fully understand and adapt the legacy their planet had left them. Every technological limitation, they had displayed had been carefully crafted misdirection. The full extent of human military capability emerged like a rising tide, unstoppable, inexorable, and absolutely methodical. Ships that could rewrite local spacetime, weapons that could selectively accelerate entropy, defensive systems that didn't just absorb energy, but redirected it through dimensions the collective hadn't known existed. But perhaps most terrifying was the human approach to warfare itself. They didn't fight with anger or hatred or even determination. They fought with the same implacable patience that Earth itself had shown, the patience of a system that had defended itself successfully for millions of years. The collective's desperate attempts to understand and counter human technology proved futile. How do you fight an enemy whose very existence rewrites the rules of engagement? How do you defend against weapons that aren't just advanced, but fundamentally alien to your understanding of physics? A human diplomatic message, the first since the war began, drove home their impossible situation. You thought Earth was a death world because it was hostile to life. You never considered that it might be hostile to you specifically. We are not Earth's masters or its children. We are its inheritors, and we have spent centuries learning how to use every lesson it taught us. The message continued with what the collective's leadership would later realize was genuine sadness. We didn't want this war. We were content to let you believe we were primitive, to stay in our corner of space, and continue our work. You forced our hand. And now you will understand why Earth is called a death world, not because it kills indiscriminately, but because it kills with purpose. The collective's remaining worlds began to prepare for what they believed would be their final stand. They had no way of knowing that humanity had already set in motion plans that would make resistance not just futile, but irrelevant. The long night. The collective's core worlds glittered in the darkness of space. 12,000 years of civilization, compressed into a sphere barely 40 light-years across. Their last bastion, their final redoubt, protected by everything they had left. Energy shields layered so densely they distorted light. Automated defense systems that could track and destroy targets moving at relativistic speeds. Quantum-locked space itself, designed to prevent any unauthorized transit. None of it mattered. The Ghost Fleet didn't arrive with a thunderous assault or a dramatic entrance. They simply appeared, as if they had always been there, their ships threading through the quantum-locked space as easily as light through glass. But they didn't attack. They waited. The humans' final message arrived on every communication channel simultaneously. What follows isn't punishment. It's education. Then Earth's true gift to humanity revealed itself. The Ghost Fleet ships began to resonate, each one becoming a focal point for forces that the collective scientists couldn't even measure. Space itself seemed to flex and bend, not violently, but with deliberate precision. The effect rippled outward, passing through shields and defenses as if they didn't exist. When it reached the collective's worlds, it didn't destroy them. It changed them. Gravity shifted. Atmospheric composition began to alter. Temperature gradients reformed. Slowly, methodically, inexorably, each world began to transform. Your civilization has existed for 12,000 years, the human message continued. Earth has been defending itself for 3 million. We are not its first inheritors, but we are its most successful students. And now you will learn what we learned. The collective finally understood. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Each of their worlds was being reformed, transformed into a miniature version of Earth. Not to kill them, but to teach them. They would survive, but survival would require adaptation. They would have to learn to thrive in higher gravity, to breathe more corrosive air, to endure more extreme temperatures. They would have to evolve, to grow stronger, to become more than they were. Just as humanity had. The process would take centuries. Generations would be born, live, and die as their species gradually adapted to their new environments. But they would adapt because the alternative was extinction. And through it all, the Ghost Fleet would watch, ensuring that the lesson was learned. This is not cruelty, the human message explained. This is the gift Earth gave us, the understanding that true strength comes from adversity. You sought to harvest our resources, to bend us to your will. Instead, we will teach you to harvest strength from hardship, to grow through challenge, to become something greater than you are. The collective's leadership, watching their civilization transform around them, finally asked the question they should have asked from the beginning. Why? The answer came not from the humans, but from Araya, their AI companion, because they hope you'll learn what they learned, that the universe is far older and stranger than you imagine. That strength without wisdom is meaningless, and that true power lies not in dominating others, but in understanding why you shouldn't. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy would watch as the collective's worlds transformed. Species that had grown soft in their technological comfort learned to thrive in hostile environments. Civilizations that had relied on overwhelming force learned the value of adaptation and ingenuity. And humanity. They returned to their corner of space, to their primitive ships and outdated weapons, to continue their work. The Ghost Fleet became legend, a story told to remind the galaxy that appearances can be deceiving, that true power often hides in plain sight, and that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Earth continued its eternal vigil, its ancient defenses still active, still watching, still waiting, and humanity continued to learn from it, to grow with it, to prepare for whatever might come next from the deep dark between the stars. Because they understood something that the collective had forgotten in their 12,000 years of dominance. The universe is vast, ancient, and full of mysteries. And sometimes, the greatest power lies not in conquering those mysteries, but in learning to live with them, to grow through them, and to become something more than you ever imagined possible. The long night had ended. The lesson had begun.